circumstances on the ground. Syrian Defense Forces have been a strong ally of the United States of America. The President was very interested in hearing from General Mazloum about the status of forces on the ground. General Mazloum reported to him that at this point Turkish forces had not gone beyond the 30-mile buffer zone, but General Mazloum expressed particular concern about the city of Kobani and asked the President to raise that issue directly with President Erdogan and the Turkish government as a great concern of Kurdish forces. The President, after that call, spoke to President Erdogan. President Erdogan reached out and requested the call. And President Trump communicated to him very clearly that the United States of America wants Turkey to stop the invasion, to implement an immediate ceasefire, and to begin to negotiate with Kurdish forces in Syria to bring an end to the violence. President Trump reiterated his offer to mediate and arbitrate a negotiation between Syrian Defense Forces and the Turkish military. And the President has directed me and Robert O'Brien to lead a delegation to Turkey in the immediate future to begin discussions and negotiations to bring the bloodshed to an end. The President did receive a commitment from President Erdogan to not attack the city of Kobani. As I said, General Mazloum had raised the issue of Kobani as of paramount importance to the Kurdish population. President Trump was very direct with President Erdogan on that point and received a firm commitment from President Erdogan that there would be no attack against the city of Kobani. Today, the President also met with Senator Lindsey Graham, who was present when the President signed an executive order implementing a new range of sanctions against Turkey. But again, to be very clear, the President of the United States called on the President of Turkey to stop the invasion, to enact an immediate ceasefire and to begin negotiations with Kurdish forces in Syria. And the President has directed me to lead a delegation to Turkey to begin those discussions about how we can bring this violence to an end. With that, let me recognize the Treasury Secretary who will describe the new sanctions that have been implemented today.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. So as you know, last week the President announced that there would be sanctions forthcoming if Turkey moved forward with these actions. Last Friday, I briefed you on the specifics of the authorities. Today, the President signed those authorities and instructed me to put them into action. So effective immediately, we have sanctioned 3 of the ministers, the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Interior, and the Minister of Energy. We have also sanctioned the Department of Defense and the Ministry of Energy. These sanctions are both primary sanctions as well as secondary sanctions for any financial institutions that are doing significant transactions. I'd like to specifically say that with these sanctions, we will be simultaneously issuing 2 general licenses. The first general license will be very clear that the United Nations and other NGOs that are conducting humanitarian responses will be able to continue. I'd also like to be clear that we will be issuing a license for the U.S. government and parties of the U.S. government to continue operations with Turkey, as well as we will be issuing a license so that Turkey can continue to buy fuel. We are not looking to shut down the energy for the people of Turkey. License number 2 will authorize a 30-day wind-down period for all the general operations to allow for ordinary business. The president has been very clear. These sanctions are very, very strong. He is prepared to remove these sanctions if there is the necessary actions on Turkey's point. Again, we will be issuing a press release detailing the specifics of this and the appropriate licenses. And with that, I'm happy to take 2 or 3 questions on the technical issues associated with the sanctions.
Secretary, question for you on what is going to be the red line that will lift these sanctions, essentially. You just said that the president is willing to do so. What are the conditions that President Erdogan has to meet? Is it a ceasefire, as the Vice President said? Mr. Vice President, a question for you. Why is the president confident that these sanctions are not too little too late to stop what's happening on the border?
Well, I'll answer the why not too little too late, and I'll let the Vice President answer the issue of what would take the removal. As we've warned all along, our desire is not to shut down the Turkish economy. Our desire is to see an appropriate response. These sanctions will be very severe on the Turkish economy. We can continue to ramp up these sanctions. So we were very clear in warning the government of the sanctions. We were deliberate last Friday in not putting them in place. The president has been monitoring the situation and the concerns, and with that, I'll turn it over to the Vice President.
President Trump made it very clear that the United States is going to continue to take actions against Turkey's economy until they bring the violence to an end. We want an immediate ceasefire, and we want to begin negotiations between Turkey and Syrian defense forces. And President Trump again offered to have the United States of America mediate in those discussions. But from very early on, the president's been very clear. We have great concerns about civilian populations. We have great concerns about religious minorities, Christians and other religious minorities within the area where the Turkish invasion is currently underway. And of course, we have concern about ISIS fighters who are being held by Kurdish forces today. Now, General Mazloum did give the president an assurance that the Kurdish forces would continue to support the prisons that detain ISIS fighters. But the president's also made it clear to Turkey that we expect them to take efforts to continue to restrain and ensure the ongoing detention of any ISIS fighters captured over the last 2 years of fighting. But the president's objective here is very clear, that the sanctions that were announced today will continue and will worsen unless and until Turkey embraces an immediate ceasefire, stops the violence, and agrees to negotiate a long-term settlement of the issues along the border between Turkey and Syria.
Last question.
Please.
What did the president authorize in his conversation initially with President Erdogan a week ago on Sunday? Did he authorize any military action by the Turks short of what we've seen so far? And then secondly, sir, you say that the president asked for a ceasefire. What did Erdogan say in response to that? Did he commit to anything?
Well, the United States of America did not give a green light to Turkey to invade Syria. The president has been very clear on that point and reiterated that to President Erdogan today. President Erdogan, I think, knows President Trump's mind on this matter very clearly today. But President Trump pressed him very strongly in the telephone call today to immediately embrace a ceasefire. As I said, he's directed me to lead a delegation. We'll be leaving as quickly as possible to travel into the region to pursue a ceasefire and a negotiated settlement. But the president, look, he said from the time he was a candidate and forward that he wanted to bring an end to endless wars and opportunities for us to bring troops home and to have American forces come out of harm's way has always been a priority for this president. But that didn't mean that this president in any way encourages violence anywhere in the world, let alone along the border between Turkey and Syria. And the president reiterated that point to President Erdogan today, and we're going to continue to stand very strongly. The sanctions that have been imposed today are a beginning. President Trump made it very clear that we will continue to use the strength of this economy, and we'll continue to engage our allies. President Trump spoke to President Macron of France today. We're going to be engaging allies around the world, and as President Trump did today, we're going to continue to call on President Erdogan to end the violence, come to the table, and embrace a negotiated settlement.
Thanks, guys.
Go ahead.
Has the visit with Erdogan been canceled? And can you tell us specifically what is the United States going to do about all of the ISIS fighters that have escaped from the jails, as our reporters on the ground have indicated?
Well, there's been no decision made about a scheduled meeting next month. Let me say the president could not have been more firm with President Erdogan today. The United States of America is simply not going to tolerate Turkey's invasion of Syria any further. And we're calling on Syria to stand down, to end the violence, and come to the negotiating table. And that's the reason the president is sending me to the region, to make his intention very clear. And we're going to be looking for Turkey to take strong action in that regard. But the president also made it clear when he talked to General Mazloum of the Kurdish forces, when he talked to President Erdogan, that we anticipate and expect that Kurdish forces and Turkish forces will safeguard and ensure the ongoing detention of ISIS forces, those that have been captured. Now, General Mazloum told the president today that in his words, we keep ISIS under control. He made that commitment to the president, and President Erdogan also knows where President Trump stands. But make no mistake about it, the president is very concerned about instability in the region. He's very concerned about the loss of innocent civilian lives. He's very concerned about religious minorities. And that's why today, at the president's direction, the United States has imposed punishing sanctions on Turkey and made it very clear that that will only be the beginning unless Turkey is willing to embrace a ceasefire, come to the negotiating table, and end the violence.
All right, thank you guys. One quick question. One quick question.